All we do is diss white women. No,
You're
I'm
gonna
just
hate
kidding.
us.
So,
None of the views, opinions, or information shared on this podcast are shared in the context of a professional contracted relationship and should not be considered therapy or any type of professional advice. If you have urgent mental health concerns or any kind of emergency, please call or text 988, the Crisis and Suicide Hotline, where you can speak 24/7 to a counselor, or dial 911 for other emergency services. Please remember that you are not alone and you are worth fighting for. So please keep fighting. Love, your ex-therapist.
hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us for episode 2.
Woo, woo.
Episode 2, I feel like, is me running a line of defense against what I said in episode 1 about
Oh,
breathing exercises, because I already got some feedback about it.
no way.
Well, I'm only slightly kidding, but people had big feelings about their precious breathing exercises. And so I feel I must start this episode by clarifying. If you find breathing exercises helpful, please continue to do so. I did not mean to imply that breathing exercises or techniques or methodologies or tools have no purpose or
Hmm.
benefit or place in therapy.
Yeah.
We'll be talking today in more depth about my personal feelings about them, and also why they can sometimes be, I don't know, how would you say, problematic or a little
Yeah.
bit, I don't know, how would you describe it, Marjorie?
It gets a little touchy when it becomes your be all solution,
Right, right.
or you want to die on that hill energy. Then it's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
For me, at least, is how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the great things about not being a therapist anymore is I don't have to spend my entire existence tiptoeing around my colleagues' feelings. And
That's
so,
nice.
yeah, it is kind of refreshing. But I say this with love when I say that there are a lot of mindfulness therapists out there who are, well, terrible.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and yeah, who unfortunately, as opposed to having a toolbox of tools, typically have one or they have just a couple. And that to them equates a comprehensive therapy practice. And to me, that does not therapy make. Um, so it's kind of like, you know, everything's a nail and the only tool you have is a hammer, even though you may come across, screws and hooks and all
Yeah.
sorts of different situations, scenarios. Not that people are, hooks and
Different
nails and
nails. Yeah.
screws, but, just that idea where you're applying the same technique to every single scenario.
Correct.
And that's just not appropriate.
Mm-mm.
And so we'll get into a little bit more of that. But before we begin to dive deeper, I did want to take a moment and just kind of go back to the beginning, um, and talk about what our relationship is to mindfulness and breathing exercises just personally, and maybe professionally, or however we sort of conceptualize that, because I
Yeah.
think that'll kind of give us a good sense of where we're starting at, just our own opinions, our own biases, our own like what we have found helpful or not helpful. That way that we're just being like fully transparent about like where we're coming from when we're talking about this subject.
Wonderful. Sounds great. Would you like to start?
Well, I think I've already kind of started. So how about you, Marjorie? Everybody knows how I feel about this clearly.
Okay, do you want me to start on like what's my relationship to mindfulness mostly
I mean, either
first?
way. Yeah, either way.
Okay, hold on. Now, as a therapist, I feel like I really should know the correct definition of mindfulness
No,
so that
I
actually,
think it would be helpful to start with a definition because it could mean a lot of different things to different people. And
hmm
while you're looking up the definition,
yes,
we could start with a little bit of history
yes,
because actually the history of mindfulness is kind of it's presented in a couple of different ways because mindfulness actually stems from a history that is like millennia
yeah,
old because it's
yes.
actually from Buddhist teachings. Um, and it's actually from the meditative practices of some of those Buddhist teachings. Now, obviously, we have deeply, you know, bastardized and
As we
contorted
do.
them, yes, as we ruin all amazing things here in the West. And we've commercialized it, we've
Mhm.
repackaged it, we've
Mhm.
slapped names and patents and labels on it and sold it and um made it so that people aren't allowed to use certain versions of it without
Right.
paying for certification, which is also another problem we'll get into.
hmm
um but yeah, it was, I think from what I have here in my notes, it was popularized here in the United States in the 1960s and 70s. Specifically, I think 1979, a molecular biologist actually named John Kabat-Zinn established what became the mindfulness-based stress reduction program at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And he had a vision that he experienced during Vipassana, which, are you familiar with that?
No.
So, Vipassana is a meditation retreat, which is a completely, I think, silent meditative retreat
Mm.
where I think I forget how long it is. So, I'm not going to go ahead and say how long it is, but it's, from what I remember, I think it's at least a week, maybe longer, where you actually
Wow.
go and you meditate in like complete silence, and it's pretty intense from what I understand. But I guess during one of these retreats, he had a vision of adapting and applying Buddhist teachings to mainstream medical and popular settings. And he, I guess, founded this school. And so that was when it started to become popularized. So that is, I mean, he wasn't the only person who was doing this. It was being done by other people as well, but it was starting to be adopted.
Yeah,
We do have sort of a fetishization of Eastern practices. We sure
we really
love an
do.
Asian, any sort of Asian ritual or
Yeah.
ceremony. Gosh, we
Yeah.
just can't help ourselves. So this was one of them. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Well,
So
would you?
what, yeah, what would you look at that? Absolutely. We should look at that.
I'm not surprised because honestly, in everything we've learned, even in school, the origination was based on, oh, I found this thing in a different country, and let me go ahead and make it a thing over here in my country.
Right.
And, the rest is history.
Isn't it though?
So when it comes to that, not shocking. I was looking at the definition of mindfulness, at least, you know, in the American Psychological Association, since we're
Hmm.
doing it in the therapeutic sense.
Hmm.
It says that mindfulness is awareness of one's internal states and surroundings. Mindfulness can help people avoid distraction or automatic habits and responses by learning to observe their thoughts, emotions, and other present moment experiences without judging or reacting to them.
Yeah. So that
Cool.
seems pretty straightforward, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So awareness.
Which we know is actually quite difficult.
What are you talking about? I'm only at level 300 on my Zen word game.
Yes, absolutely. But I think, I guess, in my relationship to that definition of mindfulness, um, I had not developed any sort of self-awareness of my own thoughts, emotions until maybe my mid-20s, starting. I was such a rose-colored glasses kind of person. Um, I only was searching for neutrality or numbness of myself and said, that's good feelings. Um, and so I would have assumed that I thought I was super mindful back then because I didn't feel stress or anxiety or whatever you want to call it, just other feelings because I was actually just good at not seeing them or paying attention to them. Um, so mindfulness to me was sort of like the door to paying attention to feelings that were uncomfortable, which was basically all of them. Yeah, and that also includes joy
Hmm.
and happiness. That was so foreign to truly actually feel those things. So I guess in that definition, mindfulness actually made me feel more uncomfortable living in my own skin, in my own thoughts. Um, but it's not in the Zen way that's being presented, like what you were talking about, where it was created. Mine's the opposite. I looked and appeared Zen, but mindfulness actually made me more expressive, needing to talk more, participate in life, quite the opposite of being silent, if you will. So, yeah, I think that's mine. A little spiel or relationship with mindfulness. What about you?
Well, before we
Oh,
go to me, I'm just curious, what
yeah.
about breathing techniques or breathing exercises? What are
So,
those like for you?
so breathing to me, almost, I didn't realize that's a thing I do all the time because I was so not wanting to have feelings. I was paying attention to, I remember going back because I knew we were going to talk about this topic, but I remember being in a classroom like in middle school. I mean, middle school didn't exist in the Philippines, but elementary school, but I was like 12. And I remember just looking at the window and taking deep breaths and enjoying like the monastery because we were, part of a Catholic church and looking at the trees and smelling the air and really just being in it. And I also do breathing unconsciously. Like I know whenever I have a hard time going to bed, I'll do it. But I didn't realize that this was like a thing that people
Hmm.
capitalized on to sell and teach.
Right?
Um, so when people started bringing in like, oh, have you tried this breathing technique and meditation? I actually found it annoying
Hmm.
to be told how to breathe or the things you could do to shut your mind. I was like, I have the opposite issue. I actually need to be thinking.
Mm-hmm.
My work is not to calm myself down.
Mm-hmm.
That's too much for me. So breathing to me is like an instinctual thing
Mm-hmm.
to do. And I'm just more annoyed when people tell me I should I should do it. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no. So sometimes yoga doesn't work for me. No. Yoga does not work for me. Or if you were to tell me to like, let's go to this breathing retreat, I'd be pissed.
Like, no, I need to go kickboxing.
Yes. Like that's
Yeah.
not an issue for me.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's where I have a hard time with the people who want it to be such a intense tool to give
Yeah.
to people because I'm like that may not be what they need.
Right.
They're probably really good at it and they're just not mindful
Mm-hmm.
that they do it already.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? But yeah, I'm on that end of the breathing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective on that because I think that there are more people who have that experience but don't realize they're having that experience and wonder why they're not having success, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote, success with
Right.
these techniques, or they're not enjoying these supposedly universally appealing experiences, and they're like, no, I
Oh,
hate this actually. And
yeah.
they're being told, well, that means that you are supposed to do it more. You just need to like
Mm-hmm.
you just need to develop a practice. Like,
Yes.
at first you're not going to like it, but you will, like, if you just keep doing it. And it's like alienating and it makes them feel abnormal or like an alien. And
Yeah.
really, it's just that everybody's central nervous system is different and we all have
Right.
different things that we need. So I
Yes.
really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been really nice sharing that.
Yes. So if you're a Marjorie of the world, just know that
Yeah.
your experience is valid. You do not have to like meditation retreats and you do not have to like being told to breathe, okay?
Yes. That actually is actually just telling me what to do is ultimately the issue.
Yeah. Also extremely valid.
So I think that is my own self-awareness moment. I was like, I love all the tools. I just need to do it myself.
Right,
That's all.
right.
But thank you.
Thank you for trying to help me. Now please stop.
Yes, I got this. Ridiculous. But yeah. All right. I think now it's time for your mindfulness journey.
Ah,
How do you
yes.
do it? How do you do it? How did you get
Mm,
there? How do you like it?
So, yeah, so I have a complicated relationship with mindfulness and breathing exercises, which stem from really bad experiences as a teenager, being forced to go to DBT groups.
Mm,
For people who don't know what DBT is, that's dialectical behavioral therapy, which was very popular when I was an adolescent. It really hit the early aughts. It
mm,
became very popular for the treatment of what was also a very popular diagnosis at that time, which was borderline personality disorder.
ooh, ooh.
hmm A lot of teenage girls who had any kind of trauma were getting those diagnoses for a whole variety of reasons. And for me, I had a lot of trauma, a lot of long-standing, ongoing, complex trauma. So today, you know, I received a diagnosis of complex trauma as opposed to borderline personality disorder. It wasn't really an appropriate diagnosis then. It's not an appropriate diagnosis now. And today I like to say that a lot of people, you may have a BPD diagnosis. Maybe that feels like the right diagnosis for you. Maybe it doesn't feel like the right diagnosis for you, but regardless, the criteria of BPD is a cluster of symptoms that stem from trauma. So,
Right.
however you define that for yourself is totally valid. Um, and as a result, the way to treat DBT at the time, a lot of places were putting together DBT groups. And so DBT is an offshoot of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And so a big part of DBT is acceptance, and there are mindfulness components. And really, how it was practiced in my DBT group was you should be aware that this is all your fault.
Just straight up.
And now I should say they did not actually say that, but there was some messaging around your behavior is making your problems worse, essentially.
That's what
And
mindfulness is.
yes, yes. And a lot of the acceptance pieces um, asked us to accept situations that I felt, and I told my therapist this, that I felt were unacceptable. I did not find it acceptable to be abused. I did not find it acceptable to be screamed at. I did not find it acceptable to live in fear in my house. You know, these were things
Yeah.
that I felt I was being asked to accept. Now, my therapist was asking me to differentiate, you know, well, you have to accept that, you can't change those things. And I was like, well,
Okay.
I'm actually not, and
I don't think
so,
so.
yeah, so it was a really interesting, it was a very interesting dynamic, that, at the time, I think we could argue that there were a lot of people who were practicing DBT in a lot of different ways. And we could say that, oh, it was that therapist just not, implementing DBT very well. I think that, we have what trauma informed CBT now. We have some other ways of, doing more trauma informed types of mindfulness, etc. But I'm going to be really honest with you. And I mean this, actually, I don't mean this with love, like just straight up. The vast majority of therapists out there who are calling themselves trauma therapists, they are fucking terrible, and they do
Yeah.
not know what they're doing, and they are causing harm to clients. And a lot of them don't realize that they're causing a lot of harm, but they are. And it stems from a lot of reasons, but mindfulness and breathing exercises are not appropriate treatment modalities for trauma without first implementing a lot of the other trauma treatment modalities and having a really intimate understanding of how trauma lives in the body, how trauma affects the body, and an intimate understanding of how that person experiences trauma in their bodies, and whether or not that person's, like, if that person feels safe in their own body, which again is a huge problem and is my experience with mindfulness and breathing exercises, because it took many years before I even felt okay and safe enough in my body to be in my body long enough to practice mindfulness and breathing exercises in a way that did not induce full-blown panic attacks or dissociative symptoms,
Hmm.
and and I, without awareness that those things were happening, and so I think that there is well-intentioned people out there who are exacerbating people's trauma symptoms
Mm-hmm.
without knowing it,
Mm-hmm.
and calling themselves trauma therapists. And that's, really unfortunate. And they're also charging $200 an hour while they're
Right.
telling people, oh, if this isn't working for you and if you're getting worse, it just means that you need to keep going and you need to practice this more and it will pass. And I think that that is wrong. Now,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, I don't speak for everyone. I am not everyone. There are people out there who I know have experienced benefits from mindfulness and breathing exercises. Am I saying that there are not people who have trauma, who have gotten through trauma through only mindfulness and breathing? No, I don't know. I'm not everybody. I'm sure there have been, but there are also a lot of people where that has not been the case.
And that's what we're talking about,
Right.
to let
So,
you all know.
right. So
Mm-hmm.
that is where my background comes from. I also, even today, my practice of mindfulness and breathing exercises does not look like sitting in a room quietly with a bunch of people focusing on my breath. Like that's not how I practice it. And in fact, I'm going to make a short video talking about alternate ways to do mindfulness and breathing for people who are neurotic squirrels and cannot sit in a room focusing on their breath without
Yeah,
wanting to yeet themselves into the sun. Like, it's fine. It's okay.
it's totally okay.
There are other ways to do this, I promise.
Right. You're like, this is just the beginning of us showing different ways that are naturally therapeutic and
Mhm.
healing. It's
Yes.
not just this one thing, just because
Yes.
it's made its worldwide debut.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So, with that being said, now that we've kind of just shared where we're coming from, just our own
Mhm.
sort of personal backgrounds, what are your thoughts on these sorts of certification or these well, I guess certifications where you are getting trained in a certain type of mindfulness or, well, let's see. There are several different types of mindfulness. Like Kabat-Zinn had an original course called the Stress Reduction and Relaxation Program. And there are different types of certifications and programs and retreats and all these sorts of things where you can become a certified mindfulness therapist.
Wow.
Yeah. And I guess what is your thought as a therapist yourself? Like, and someone who has to some extent, pay for CEUs and
Yeah.
be on that sort of ongoing wheel of education. Like,
Where do I stand?
yeah, yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on?
If you asked me right after grad school about certifications, I would have said something about the importance of it, um, and how useful it is to keep learning and trying new things. And it was exciting at the time because it would have been new to me. Um, but then, as it's been now 7 years since I've graduated from grad school, and finding out every year that it's the same trainings and all of them also all just say the same things in different words kind of what we just found out about mindfulness and relaxation. Um, Certifications then now to me just look like ways to prove to other humans that I did something or that I know something or that I paid for this really expensive thing. But it doesn't actually mean anything if I actually learned anything well, or if I implemented it, or if I'm suddenly a master in it. Um, it's starting to become more and more cynical, and I kind of start seeing it as like our own little pyramid scheme, um, to where like, hey, if you get this certification and you level up and level up and level up, then you can then teach the new people this thing and they're gonna start leveling up and then they're gonna teach and I was like but like what's its purpose? I don't
Hmm.
know. So I kind of see sort of certifications in that way, but also I'm not the first one to see it. I remember listening to a podcast called Bad Therapist and they spoke a lot about the way we receive our continuing education and all that jazz. So now to me, I'm currently at the stage, who knows if this is a thing, in therapist where none of those things matter to me.
Right.
And I'm just doing it to have tax deductibles and meeting uh, ethical and law requirements to
Hmm.
keep my licensure.
Hmm.
That's where I'm at, unfortunately. Who knows? There could be another tick where I'm excited for something new or someone develops something new that I'd be like, yeah, I want to be part of that. And then
Hmm.
find out that they also stole it from somewhere in Asia. And then and then the cycle repeats itself, you know?
Right.
So that's kind of where I land in in that topic, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
Or
do you
then I
ma
get really upset when like when the instructors are actually shit as well,
Yes,
which happens.
it does.
And then I get really upset that I'm like, I already knew this thing. Like I
Yeah.
remember when we went to a conference and
Oh,
everywhere we went, I was just like, none of this is new.
yes.
But I paid so much money.
So much money. Yeah.
So it's
Hmm.
just a revolving door of how we get money outside of providing services, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And how do you manage that sort of feeling of just disillusionment, especially in private practice?
you're right. So far, I haven't.
Okay, okay. Great, good. So we're doing really well. We are feeling good.
I remember this moment where an old supervisor of mine was getting shit about implementing some skills about EMDR, and folks who were obviously interns and young into the profession were deeply upset for not her talking about it without being trained or um, masterful and it being her thing, as saying that that was unethical and horrible to that and it would be harmful. And I remember then being like, oh my gosh, yes, that's horrible. Why would you practice certain techniques of EMDR if you're not trained? Now I understand my supervisor.
Right.
Let's just say that.
Yeah.
I understand where she was coming from. So I don't know if that's just like how it works in the development of being a therapist,
Hmm. Yeah.
or maybe the the lure of being a therapist is officially gone.
Yeah, maybe. Or
Who
this is
knows?
just another phase of development and you'll hit another phase.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
currently, this is what it looks like for me.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will change.
Well, with that being said, though, I mean, are there any aspects of like mindfulness or breathing exercises that you do find useful?
I like it as the one wanting to provide that tool
Hmm.
for a client. It seems like there's this very specific relationship status between me and my client, and really deeply knowing them in the moment for me to sort of like hand the tool for them to want to try,
Hmm.
if you will. And that's the time where I'm like, yes, love that
Hmm.
thing
Right.
because I already kind of knew you would be receptive.
Hmm.
It was the right time for you. Or you don't mind being told what to do. I think
Hmm.
that sometimes I have to like be aware of.
Yeah.
Um, so I like it for that, you know, like certain people who would come in with a panic attack or would have a panic attack in session.
Yeah.
uh, Already having the rapport and saying things like, hey, would you like for me to try this?
Hmm.
Or just listen or witness. And, even though they feel like they're dying inside. But I don't mind like the five senses.
Right. Hmm.
That's great, especially in those times. Now, if I was
Hmm.
having a panic attack and you came in to swoop in and told me how to do the five senses, I'd
Hmm.
punch you. It's just not going to work for me. But if you were my therapist, you would already know that.
Right.
So you would
Maybe
just
that's one
witness
of
me.
the senses is punching you. Like that's
Yeah.
I feel grounded already. Like, hey, all I had to do was knock someone's teeth in. Like, whew, wow, I feel better.
Thank you so much. That regulated my system.
Wow. There you go. That's a certification right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
For,
Or mine would be
forget
like,
forget nonviolent communication. Where's my violent communication certification? Right there. That's a CEU I can get
yes.
behind.
Actually, there was a moment that you helped me out really well with when it came to anxiety because I'm terrified of flying.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Where you were like, actually, you should lean in more to your anxiety. Let it do its thing.
Hmm.
It's trying to like whatever. I can't describe
Hmm.
it because normally I would be like, hold it in, shove it deep, deep into the recesses of your mind, and
Hmm.
don't have it. But I think for me to like actually be in anxiety and panic
Hmm.
is what makes me grow
Hmm.
into a more whole person.
Well, you're constantly not feeling things, right?
Exactly. And that
So,
one opens the doors to the feelings.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. So mine is not to have the deep breathing, it's to just have shallow breathing and feel like
Mm,
dying
right.
to really feel like you're alive. Oddly.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, see, and that's the kind of breathing that I have, which is so interesting because when you were describing being young and naturally,
Hmm.
or you were just describing naturally having that breathing pattern and, being annoyed when people were telling you to breathe, it was making me think of being young.
Yeah.
And I was that way as well. Like so I used to I had this period of time when right before so I had like young onset puberty. And right before I hit puberty, I developed really severe migraines. And like I was like 9 and I had just like 9 to 11. I had these horrible migraines and like they were so bad. Like I wanted to just like hit my head against the wall. Like they were so bad. And there was nothing that helped. And um like I would just have to like turn off all the lights and just like I would just lay in my bed and like weep because you wouldn't want to cry because crying made it hurt more. And so at at the time, like I went to this really like hippy dippy sort of babysitter who would
Hmm.
do like these she would have us do like some meditation type things and like little fiber arts
Yeah.
and like play in nature and stuff like that. And but in the meditation classes, they would have us like do like um in like visual type exercises just in our mind's eye or whatever. But as a result of that, I started doing this thing because my headaches were so bad. I would do anything, right? And so I just remember I would lay there and I would just imagine like the red pulsating of the pain,
Hmm.
because like, I mean, it was just all encompassing. And I would just imagine like try to make the red pulsing pain smaller, and I would imagine like it being replaced by white light and just try and like replace it and just like watch it like sort of like seep out or see if I could like make it move or like just try
Mm.
and do like different things with it. And over time, like I figured out how to reduce the pain of my migraines through that process.
Wow.
And yeah, like it was because it was the only thing I could do. And I would just like lay there in bed and like do this because it was just like, what else are you going to do? Right. It was just
Right.
like, and like yeah, and so through that you're just laying there and breathing and just doing these things. And it was the same thing. I used to climb trees and like I would just sit up in the tree and like breathe and like hold I remember like I would wrap my arms around the tree and just like breathe
Yeah.
and like smell, like
I
can
can
smell the
literally
tree.
smell the tree. Yeah.
Yeah, right, as we're sitting there thinking about it.
Hmm.
And like all of those things were like very natural and things that just came really naturally. But like thinking now as an adult, like my breathing over time became very shallow. And like I developed a very shallow breathing pattern as an adult. And I
Hmm.
don't know like when that changed or like why that changed. But well, I mean, trauma, obviously, but but even when I was younger, like I had trauma then, but my
Yeah.
breathing pattern wasn't shallow. And then as an adult, my breathing pattern is very shallow to the point that like certain breathing exercises cause me to hyperventilate because
Mm.
they're like really incompatible with my natural breathing rhythm.
Yeah.
And so like having to think about that, and like now I rather do things when I'm walking as opposed to when I'm like laying down or just sitting still because I'm more likely to hyperventilate trying to do that. So it's just like really interesting, like, and I share that so that like if you're listening to this and you're somebody who experiences that hyperventilating feeling, or when you're trying to do a breathing exercise and you're like I feel like I'm like it's making me feel short of breath or like I'm gasping or like I'm not able to take a deep enough breath or hold it long enough.
Hmm.
I would encourage you to think about your natural respiratory pattern and whether you can do something when you are walking or thinking about different kinds of breathing exercises, because you do not have to do them the way that they are told to you to get benefit. Like your natural respiration is determined by your central nervous system and certain systems in your body that have been keyed a certain way
Hmm.
based on things that have happened, um, things that are happening in the present, and you can slow or speed up your respiration a little bit at a time and get that benefit. But you shouldn't do so in a way that's going to cause you distress, because that's really counterproductive to everything.
Yes.
So.
Please, you do not actually need to do a brute force situation of the
No,
healing.
no. And if it's, you know, if you don't like it and you're not gonna do it. So it's like, why? Yeah.
It's so true. And I like that you bring that up because it's sort of that is my gripe with the whole breathing meditation
Hmm.
thing. It's because it's not universal. And
Right.
therapy is meant to be super unique to the person.
Hmm.
It's finding out who they are,
Hmm.
how they work, what works for them. My job is not to being like, oh, actually, instead of you using that hammer,
Hmm.
you need a screw.
Yep.
No, I want you to figure out what kind of nail you are.
Hmm.
Keeping up with the metaphor,
Right.
okay?
Good job. Good job.
And I want you to instinctually find out what you are and what you need to use. That's kind of like what I think makes therapy grand
Hmm.
if you know how to do that. But
Absolutely.
or not even with therapy, but just whatever's naturally therapeutic to you, like
Hmm.
people who garden or farm or work out, whatever it is. Like you found it. That's why it's so good for you.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Well, and you can incorporate these things into what you're already doing. That's what also it kind of, this is why I am kind of like offended and annoyed and just all the things about the commercialization and the fact that we have this entire industry that has sprung up around mindfulness and breathing, and that we have these like, I mean, and look, again, yoga it can be so wonderful. I used to do yoga a lot when I was younger. Um, but it's like I get so uncomfortable in those spaces as an adult because it's so hard to separate out what I see as
Mm,
just this problematic health culture and these spaces that have all these barriers and just deeply saturated messaging of, there is a right way to do these things, and it looks like this, and it
yeah.
looks like that, and it's this, and it's that, and it smells like this. Like, you walk into a yoga studio and they smell like, it's the incense, it's the nag champa, it's the, you know what I mean? Like, it's all,
Yeah.
and the people who are there look a certain way and they're wearing the certain stuff, and it just,
It
all
does.
of you, you're sitting there thinking about it in your mind's eye right now, you know what I mean? Like, it populates this
Yeah.
image.
Yeah.
And it's the same with like mindfulness and breathing exercises. For me, it's like it conjures up a certain therapist. It just does.
A nice spiritual bypassing kind or
Yeah, well, a middle-aged white woman.
oh, yes.
So, my point being,
Mhm.
before I was rudely interrupted by my computer dying, see, I'm all sweaty with stress.
Yeah. Was
I
it
could
good?
do some mindful breathing.
Now would be a good time to try it out.
Do you notice that the frame has changed and that I look a little more angry than I did a few minutes ago? It is because I am. No, it's fine. My computer battery died right in the middle of recording, and
Yes.
now I am
And all
breathing.
throughout that, you did some deep breathings instead of freaking. Just kidding.
Yeah, no. Okay, I will stop breathing obnoxiously into the microphone.
I oddly cannot hear it, so you're good.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
No,
nothing.
really, you can't hear that?
No.
Oh, well, the filter on this microphone must be working very well.
Yeah, they're like, you don't want that sound in here.
Yeah,
Just
no, you really don't, because I'm just breathing angrily into the mic.
But yes.
Anyway, before we were rudely interrupted, I was rudely talking about a certain type of therapist. No, I was making wild accusations and aspersions about a certain demographic of
Mm.
therapist who tends to gravitate towards mindfulness and therapeutic breathing as their favorite modality. And we call this spiritual bypassing.
Yes. Yeah.
What does spiritual bypassing mean?
Literally, based on what it says on the definition.
Well, let's look it up, shall we?
Okay.
Spiritual bypassing, just as a definition, spiritual bypassing refers to the act of using spiritual beliefs or practices to avoid facing and dealing with unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, or personal challenges. Essentially, using spirituality as a way to sidestep uncomfortable feelings rather than addressing them directly. It's considered a form of defense mechanism that can hinder genuine personal growth and connection with oneself and others. It does say the term was popularized by Buddhist teacher and psychotherapist John Welwood. Now, I do want to do an entire episode on this topic, so I don't want to get too into it. And we're going to wrap up this episode, but I will say that mindfulness and therapeutic breathing tend to kind of go hand in hand
Mhm.
with therapists. For whatever reason, there seems to be kind of, I'm not going to say causation or anything like that, but like there is kind of like a correlation with therapists who seem to engage in this kind of behavior, um, which is interesting. And I say this just as somebody who has been, before in the field with a lot of therapists who specialized in mindfulness and used a lot of these techniques. A lot of therapists who professed to adhere to and practice a lot of Buddhist
Mhm.
traditions and use a lot of their techniques, and who also engaged in a lot of spiritual bypassing when confronted with or when people were trying to engage with them in resolving issues.
Mhm.
And so it's an interesting thing to notice. And if you are one of those people, well, feel free to listen up because it's a very important topic and it's something that I think can be really difficult to talk about. But it's something that has really huge impacts, not only professionally, but personally, and also as a therapist. It has huge impacts between
Yeah.
you and your clients, whether or not you think it does. And I'm just going to say, if you're one of those people who says, I don't bring politics into the therapy room, that's one of them. Just
Yeah.
flat out. Whether or not you think you do or don't, it's there. Politics are always in the room
Yeah.
because existence is inherently political. So that is all I'll say about that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today on episode 2.
Yeah.
And thank you, Marjorie, for sharing of yourself today and everything that you shared personally and professionally.
Mhm.
I adore you as always. Um, and thank you to everybody who has commented and subscribed as we're getting started with our episodes. Again, please subscribe on our YouTube channel and on Spotify. We are still in the process of getting our Apple account up and running, which hopefully we'll get that going today and get our materials uploaded there so you can listen to us on there as well. And you can also find us on social media. We are on Blue Sky at Your Ex Therapist. We're also on TikTok, although you won't see any material on there yet. But we
Yeah.
are going to upload some fun material about us doing the things that help us stay mindful. And you will see me doing some neurotic squirrel breathing exercises. Yay! If you'd like to see some diversity in what kind of breathing can qualify as relaxing. So it will be fun or not fun, depending on what you consider fun,
It's true.
which also is quite diverse. All right,
Exactly.
freaks and geeks and all my favorite people, thank you so much for joining us. And stay tuned for another episode next week. You will also see a love letter, the first love letter of this season, uploaded soon from me to you all. I love you. Bye.
Bye.